Mercedes might have just been exposed. And if this is real, the entire championship could be shaken overnight. Because the FIA isn't just investigating a rumor anymore. They're investigating data. That suggests Mercedes' engine changes when it matters most. Cold, it's legal. But under real race conditions, it may be running closer to 18-to-1 compression instead of the legal 16. That's up to 40 extra horsepower. That's not an advantage. That's domination. 3 races, 3 wins, and a gap of over half a second per lap that nobody can explain. But here's where it gets even more serious. Because it's not just the engine anymore. New evidence shows Mercedes is recovering around 7.2 megajoules of energy per lap. Far more than their rivals. And that means one thing. This might not be one trick. It might be a system. A system designed to pass every FIA test, and still outperform everyone when it actually counts. So now the real question is no longer how Mercedes is winning. It's this. Have they been operating beyond the limit? While staying officially legal the entire time? Stay with me, because what was just uncovered after Japan could become the biggest technical controversy Formula One has seen in years. Subscribe now, because this moment could decide the entire 2026 season. Right after that data came out, everything inside the paddock changed. Because this was no longer a theory. It became a threat. A real one. And for the first time this season, teams stopped asking how Mercedes was so fast, and started asking something much more serious. What happens if this is illegal? Because this isn't a small detail. This isn't a wing. This isn't something you can replace overnight. This is the engine. The one component that defines everything else. And if that engine is behaving differently under real conditions, then every result we've seen so far starts to look very different. But here's what triggered the strongest reaction. It wasn't just the extra power. It was the consistency. After Japan, engineers began analyzing not just lap times, but patterns. What happens every time the car accelerates? What happens at peak temperature? What happens when performance should drop? And what they found didn't look normal. Mercedes wasn't just fast. They were predictably fast. Every lap followed the same pattern. Every deployment phase, identical. No variation. No instability. No loss. And that's where the alarm started. Because in Formula One, nothing behaves perfectly. There are always small fluctuations. Tiny drops in performance. Moments where the car struggles. But Mercedes looked almost untouched by those limits. And that raised a dangerous question. What if this isn't just a side effect of heat, but something controlled? Because if the engine consistently reaches higher compression under race conditions, and the energy system consistently delivers more output, that's not random. That's design. That's precision. That's intent. And that's exactly what the FIA is now trying to understand. Not just what the engine does, but how consistently it does it. Because proving a single spike is difficult. But proving a pattern changes everything. Because patterns suggest control. A system built to behave the same way, every single lap. And if that's confirmed, then this investigation moves to another level entirely. Because now, it's no longer about interpretation. It becomes about whether Mercedes built something that operates beyond the limit when it matters most. But here's the part that's making this even more intense. Mercedes isn't reacting. No drop in pace. No visible changes. No signs of concern. They keep winning. Keep dominating. As if nothing has changed. And that calmness is exactly what's making the rest of the grid nervous. Because it suggests something very simple. Mercedes already expected this. They knew this moment would come. And they prepared for it. And if that's true, then this isn't just an investigation. It's a countdown. A countdown to the moment where the FIA has to decide whether this is one of the smartest engineering solutions ever created, or the moment a team finally went too far. And this is where the situation starts to spiral out of control. Because once you accept that this behavior is consistent, you're forced to ask the question nobody wants to answer. How long has this been happening? Because if the engine is doing this in Japan, then it didn't just appear overnight. It wasn't discovered last week. This goes back further. Much further. Back to testing. Back to development. Maybe even back to the very first version of the engine. And that changes everything. Because now this isn't just about what Mercedes is doing now. It's about what they've been doing from the very beginning. Australia, China, Japan. 3 races. 3 wins. And all of them potentially influenced by the same behavior. And that's where the pressure on the FIA becomes enormous. Because if this is confirmed, then the investigation doesn't just affect the future. It reaches into the past. Into results that are already locked in. And that's the scenario Formula One fears the most. Because changing one race is difficult. But questioning multiple races? That's chaos. That's a championship thrown into uncertainty. And Mercedes knows it. They understand that the FIA is not just deciding legality. They are deciding consequences. And the bigger those consequences become, the harder the decision gets. But here's where things take another turn. Because inside the paddock, teams are no longer waiting. They're already reacting. Quietly. Studying the same data. Trying to understand the same system. Because if this is allowed, they need to copy it. And if it's banned, they still need to understand it. Because in Formula One, knowledge is everything. And right now, Mercedes has more of it than anyone else. But that creates a dangerous situation. Because even before the FIA gives its verdict, the grid is already moving in that direction. Closer to the same idea. Closer to the same edge. And that means one thing. This doesn't stop with Mercedes. This becomes the future. Unless the FIA draws a line. A clear one. And that's exactly what everyone is waiting for now. Not the next race. Not the next result. The decision. Because when it comes, it won't just answer whether Mercedes crossed the line. It will decide where that line actually is. And whether it can still be controlled. Because right now, it doesn't feel like it is. And that leads to the final realization building inside the paddock. This isn't just an investigation. It's a turning point. The moment where Formula One has to decide if innovation still has limits, or if those limits only exist until someone is smart enough to bend them. And now, we reach the moment where everything becomes unavoidable. Because no matter what the FIA decides next, something has already changed. Not just for Mercedes. For the entire sport. Because this investigation has exposed a weakness that nobody can ignore anymore. A gap between how the rules are written and how performance actually works on track. Because think about what really happened. The regulation was clear. 16-1. No ambiguity. But the way it was enforced didn't reflect reality. And Mercedes saw that. They didn't break the rule. They built around the way it was measured. And that's the uncomfortable truth. Because in Formula One, there is a difference between breaking the rules and understanding them better than everyone else. And right now, nobody knows which side of that line this falls on. But here's what makes this even more intense. Because inside the paddock, teams are starting to accept something they didn't want to admit. Even if Mercedes loses part of this advantage, they may still be ahead. Because this was never just one trick. It was a system. A way of designing the engine, the energy recovery, the entire car, to work together under conditions others didn't fully understand. And that kind of advantage doesn't disappear overnight. It evolves. It adapts. And that's what scares everyone. Because even if the FIA closes the compression loophole, even if they enforce new tests, even if they limit the obvious advantage, the invisible one might remain. The understanding, the integration, the control. And that's something you can't regulate instantly. Because you can ban a number, but you can't ban knowledge. And that leads to the final, unavoidable question. Because when the FIA finally delivers its verdict, and the rules finally catch up, will Mercedes actually fall back? Or will that moment reveal something even more uncomfortable? That they were never winning because of one single advantage, but because they understood the system, before anyone else even realized it could be exploited? And this is where everything finally comes into focus. Because after all the data, all the analysis, all the pressure building behind the scenes, one realization is starting to take hold inside the paddock. This might not be something you can simply stop. Not in the way people expect. Because every time the FIA moves closer to defining the problem, Mercedes seems to already be one step ahead of the solution. And that's what makes this so unsettling. Because normally, in Formula One, you find the loophole. You close it, and the advantage disappears. Simple, predictable, contained. But this time, closing the loophole might not be enough. Because what Mercedes built doesn't rely on just one opening. It adapts. It shifts. It redistributes its advantage across different areas. Compression, thermal behavior, energy recovery, deployment, all connected, all working together. And that changes everything. Because now the FIA is not chasing a fixed target. They're chasing something dynamic. Something that evolves depending on conditions. Depending on temperature. Depending on how the car is pushed during a race. And that's why this investigation feels different. Heavier. More complex. Because every answer creates a new question. Every solution reveals another layer. And through all of this, Mercedes hasn't changed. Still fast. Still consistent. Still in control. as if nothing is happening. And that's the detail nobody inside the sport can ignore anymore. Because if a team is truly under pressure, you see it. In mistakes. In instability. In performance drops. But there's nothing. No cracks. No hesitation. No sign that this investigation is affecting them at all. And that leads to the final conclusion. The one nobody wanted to reach. Mercedes is not just ahead on track. They are ahead of the investigation itself. They are operating in a space the FIA is still trying to define. And that creates a situation Formula One has never fully faced before. Because now, the governing body is not just enforcing rules. It's trying to catch up to an idea. And ideas are much harder to control. Because they don't stay still. They evolve. They adapt. They spread. And that's the real danger. Because even if Mercedes is forced to change something, even if part of this advantage disappears, the knowledge doesn't. The understanding doesn't. And that means one thing. This doesn't end here. This becomes the direction of the sport. Because once one team proves something is possible, others will follow. They always do. And that leads to the final question. The one that defines everything you've just heard. When the FIA finally catches up, will they actually stop Mercedes? Or will they simply confirm that the future of Formula One already belongs to the teams who understand the system, before anyone else even realizes it can be broken?